Hello and welcome back to Behind the Screen. This is episode 5, in which I'm going to talk about preparing for session 2 of the campaign, which is called the Hinterlands. I'm Lex Starwalker. I am the host of the RPG podcast Game Master's Journey, and I'm the dungeon master of the actual play campaign Hinterlands of Elandria. So if you're brand new to this YouTube channel, I've been streaming this campaign for a couple months now. We've played 4 sessions, and in addition to the actual play sessions, I am producing these behind the screen videos in which I talk about the dungeon master side of the campaign, preparing for the campaign, running the various sessions, and things like that. I answer your questions and talk about what you want to learn about as far as how things are going from the DM side of the screen for this campaign. And I'm doing this in the hopes that this can be a resource for newer GMs or really any GM looking to improve their craft. You can learn a lot by seeing how another GM does things. I know that I've learned a lot of the techniques I use as a game master from watching other GMs, whether it's GMs that I'm playing under or GMs on YouTube or whatever. So this is a great way, I think, for us to tackle the questions of how do I be a better game master? How do I run games? How do I prepare adventures and campaigns? And all that good stuff. So this is the 5th in this series, and we just finished playing the 4th session of the campaign yesterday. So today I'm going to be talking about preparation for the 2nd session, the Hinterlands. So if you're brand new, you might want to go and get caught up, but otherwise we'll just get into talking about session 2. So in the last Behind the Screen, I talked about running session 1 and how that went. And so as far as where I'm at after running session 1 and getting ready for session 2, planning ahead for what's going to come next. Once the players find this village that they're looking for, they'll enter it, presumably, and find it a relatively friendly place. However, many of the villagers are somewhat standoffish. They haven't seen strangers in their village for 5 years, and the PCs are obviously adventurers and magic users. So some people are distrustful, some people are fearful, and some people are hopeful that maybe these adventurers will do good things for the village. So now that the player characters have found the village and verified that it does exist and there are people living there, their next task is going to be to figure out how the village has survived on its own. And this is really what they're sent here to do. I mean, Druinda herself knew that the village was out there. Druinda is their sponsor from the guild that sent them on this mission. And she knows it's out there because she had a dream about it, and her dreams come true. Now, there were a lot of people that doubted in the city that this was a real thing. So the player characters finding the village is proving its existence to the doubters out there. But Druinda herself always knew it was there. So the real reason she sent them was to figure out how it's there. How has this village survived, presumably without a magical bubble to protect it? And even more importantly, is this something that can be useful to the city of Elandria in order to expand into new settlements where people can live and produce and relieve some of the population pressure on the city of Elandria? So once they found the village, they can really begin the task that they were truly sent here for, which is to find out how it's existing out here all on its own. When they report into Druinda using the sending zone that she gave them, she tells them in addition to discovering how the village has survived, that they can aid in its defense, help with fortifications, and begin establishing good relations with these people on behalf of the Guild of Adventurers and on behalf of the city of Elandria. Ultimately, the hope is to reestablish trade between this village and the city. And so the player characters are very much serving in the roles of diplomats in this case, and being the first contact with this village from the city in 5 years. So establishing good relations with these people is really important. Now, when the player characters begin asking the villagers how they've survived on their own, the villagers respond with very obvious answers that don't seem enough to tell the whole story. They point to the wooden wall that they've built around the town. They mentioned that the wall is constantly manned with people with various kinds of bows, and they dug a ditch around the wall, and they pretty much ascribe it to gumption and having a good wall, and anything above and beyond that is seen to be either luck or the grace of the gods or something like that. But it's pretty clear to the player characters that there must be more to the story than this, because presumably there were other towns and villages out in the world that had walls that were well guarded, and they all were destroyed. So what's different about this village? But answers to that are not forthcoming. So if the player characters push it and try to demand more of an answer, they're basically stonewalled by the villagers. The villagers deny that there's anything else to tell, and kind of refuse to answer questions along that avenue. So the players hopefully are left with this sense of there's more going on here than what we're being told. But we're strangers here, and these people don't know us, they don't trust us, and there are things that they're not telling us. So my hope is that the players will decide, hey, why don't we make friends with these people? Why don't we get to know these people, spend some time here, maybe help them out here and there, and earn reputations for ourselves and let them get to know us. So instead of being strangers who might be dangerous, we're seen as friends of the village, and maybe then they'll open up to us. And indeed, if the players don't come up with this idea on their own, there are various NPCs in the village that can make that suggestion to them. So at this point in the campaign is when I can open up the more exploration-based phase of the campaign, a lot of which is drawing ideas from Wes March's campaigns, because the player characters are basically going to be staying at this village until they can solve this mystery. And in the meantime, we'll hopefully be looking for ways to get on the good side of the villagers and earn their trust. And some ways to do that are, as Druinda suggests, to help with fortifications, help with defense, and also to just see what ways that they can help out. And in this, to this end, I've come up with numerous possible quests that the player characters can do for various villagers. So this is very much like any MMO you play where you have a little town that's a quest hub, or very much like Lost Mines of Phandelver, when the player characters in that adventure, which is from the D&D starter set, when the player characters get to the town in that adventure, it's the same kind of thing. There are numerous NPCs detailed in the town, and many of them have one or more quests that the player characters can perform for them, various tasks that they want done. Now, the nice thing about kind of the setup of this village is there's really a lot of opportunities for player characters to do things to help out the village. This village has been on its own for 5 years. It's had to become self-sufficient. And for the most part, people don't leave the walls of the village unless they absolutely have to, and leaving is dangerous. So when I was thinking of quests for PCs to do in the village, one avenue that I explored was, well, the villagers are used to being able to go out into the surrounding forest and hunt and forage and get firewood and wood for building projects and things like that. And in the last 5 years, that's much less done and much more dangerous. So one possibility for quests is anything that the villagers need done that would require leaving the village to do. They'd much rather someone else do that. So yeah, I can probably talk about more of that in a minute. Welcome to Jerome and Martin in the chat. Thanks for stopping by, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to do Q&A in these live streams. So at this point, what I'm calling the West Marches, or the exploratory phase of the campaign, opens up, and the idea here is the player characters have an objective. Because one of the major problems with a pure, quote, sandbox campaign is they often lack in direction, and there's not a clear path for the players to follow. And, it's great to give freedom to your players to do whatever they want. And I think any good RPG game should do that. But it's also good to give them some path that they can pursue if they want to, just to give them some direction, because otherwise you'll find players spending a lot of time discussing and even arguing about what they want to do, or they might be at a complete loss as to what to do. So I wanted to have direction for the players if they want to pursue, again, using video game terms, pursue a quest line or a story quest or something like that. But I also wanted to set it up in such a way that they felt free to do whatever, to go out and explore, or go visit some place they hear about just because it sounds interesting, or do whatever they want to do. So in considering this, one thing to keep in mind is anytime you come up with a quest that has some kind of a timeline associated with it, or a deadline, or is it, to use a writing term, is a time bomb kind of thing, then that is going to act to discourage sandbox play, discourage exploration, and instead will encourage players to pursue that quest. And a lot of the published adventures for D&D 5th edition suffer from this greatly. A perfect example of this is the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. Once the player characters get pulled into this storyline of trying to stop an evil cult from bringing Tiamat, the goddess of evil dragons, into the world, once the players get involved with that, it becomes really difficult to justify doing anything else. If the literal fate of the world rests on your shoulders, are you going to take a month off to learn a new language? Are you going to go check out some ruin that has nothing to do with anything just because it looks interesting? Probably not. So, one thing to think about when you're preparing an adventure is, if you want player characters to explore and to not just follow quest lines, then the quests that you give them, you need to make sure that there's not really a time limit, or if there is, it's a very forgiving time limit, or they have a lot of time to do the thing, way more than they would need. Because, you know, if you give them a quest and you say, you got to do this within 3 days, then within that 3 days, they're going to be motivated to do that quest instead of exploring. So that's kind of what I was keeping in mind, is I wanted there to be a story that the players could follow as they wish, but I wanted it to be pretty open-ended as far as how they can accomplish the goals of the story, and also how long they can take to do it. So right now, their main storyline, their main story quest right now, is to figure out how this village is surviving on its own. They don't really have a time frame. They weren't given a deadline to do that. Probably the natural assumption would be as soon as possible, but it's safe to assume that Druinda understands that this may take some time. You know, once the player characters report in and say, hey, you know, the villagers are kind of giving us these answers that don't seem to tell the whole story, and we think there's more, but it's going to take some time for us to earn their trust to find out what's really going on here, then they're kind of off the hook as far as, you know, we need results right now, right? So they can take the time that they need to take to complete this quest. And also, in order to complete this main story quest of find out how the village has survived, they're going to have to most likely complete numerous other side quests, which are namely things that they can do to help out the people of the village, to earn a good name for themselves, to make good impressions, to make some friends in the village who will hopefully eventually tell them the information that they want to know. So, you know, in this way, if they need direction or they want direction, it's there. They can pursue the main quest. They can pursue one of the quests that they get from one of the villagers. But there's nothing hanging over the player's head saying, you must do this thing now. They can also choose to do something completely different. Whatever they want, it's up to them. Now, you know, in planning this, I'm thinking that once the player characters find out what this mystery, what the secret of this village is, then that will begin a new phase of the campaign that will launch a new series of story quests as they deal with that. Because, you know, I already know what the secret is, and I'm not going to divulge that now because I don't want to spoil it, because we haven't gotten that far in the campaign yet. But I will tell you that it will lead to more things, which probably shouldn't be a surprise to you. That, you know, answering this question will lead to more questions and more things that the player characters can pursue. So at this point in the planning stage, I figure out, you know, what do I need to do? What do I need to get done so that I can run this second session? So at this point, I need to flesh out the village itself. I need a name for the village. I need to know what buildings and services are in the village. What are some of the places the PCs will likely visit? And this is how I do this. I don't sit down and map out every single building in the village and create every single NPC that lives in the village, which, you know, that might sound crazy to you that someone would even think to do that. But if you're buying, you know, these published adventures from Wizards of the Coast, like, say, for instance, Curse of Strahd, you might come away with that impression, like that's what you should do, because that's very much what a lot of those adventures are like. You know, if there's a town or a village, many of the buildings are described and mapped in great detail, and many of the NPCs are described in great detail, even if they really have nothing to do with anything. But, you know, you don't have to do all that. Again, you know, as a game master, when you're preparing to run a game, you know, focus on what you're most likely going to need right now. And the less likely you are to need something, or the less likely you're going to need something right now, the more you can put that on the back burner. And you're never going to be able to prepare for everything. And there's always going to be surprises, and that's where you improvise. So you could spend every minute of every day preparing, and the players will still do something you don't anticipate, and you're still going to have to improvise. So the point of preparation is not to try to get to a point where you're never going to have to improvise, but it's to lay as much foundation and groundwork as you can, so that when you do need to improvise, you have a lot of material to pull from, and it makes it a lot easier. So when I'm coming up with the village, a really important thing I need is the name of the village. I need some idea of kind of what the flavor of the village is like. So I like to think about, for instance, this village is self-supporting now. So what products or goods are produced in the village? How do they get their food? How do they get their water? How do they get their clothing? How do they get their building materials? I also think about 5 years ago, before the breaking of the world and before the coming of the rifts, what was the state of the village then? And one of the ideas I had was that merchants would pass through this village on the way to Elandria from places farther to the east. And so 5 years ago, the village saw quite a bit of trade as merchants came through. And so one of the big changes in the last 5 years is that trade is no longer happening. So the villagers had to learn how to be self-sufficient and how to create or produce everything that they need. And they also had to learn to go without a lot of the more luxury goods that they used to get by trading with other places. So, I get these kind of general ideas about the village, get some flavor things figured out, and then I really focus on what do I think I'm going to need. So I think about, like planning for this second session, the player characters going to the village. Where are they most likely to go? What NPCs are they most likely to talk to? So I come up with a short list. They're likely to go to an inn to find some place to stay and to eat, and maybe also as a place to get information. They're likely to interact with the staff and any guests at the inn. So those are some NPCs I can think about. They're likely to go to any kind of general store that exists to buy arrows, to buy trail rations, to sell anything they need to sell, things like that. So I can come up with that and the NPC that runs that. At some point, probably not in the second session, but at some point, they're likely to visit the village blacksmith to perhaps have a new weapon made or armor resized or repaired or something like that. So I can come up with that in that NPC. And I think that's a pretty good start as far as locations the player characters are likely to visit. Now, they may go someplace completely unexpected, like they may want to find a temple, and maybe I don't think about that. Maybe I don't plan that, and then I have to improvise. But I do think about the temple because religion is very important in Primordia. So, like most places, they worship all 18 of the gods, but certain gods are going to be more important to the people of this village. So I think about what gods those would be. Obvious choices are Dianara, goddess of the wilderness, the hunt, foraging; Asatara, goddess of agriculture; perhaps Hoppus, god of ale and brewing; Ganj, maybe the god of the pipe flower and prophetic visions and dreams and things like that. So those are some deities that would probably be very relevant to the villagers. And so I think about, how many temples are there? What are they like? Things like that. In addition, other NPCs I think about that I want to flesh out are officials in the town. So the mayor or mayors of the town, other leaders in the town, some of the guards, the captain of the guard, and things like that. And again, all of this is being generated from thinking about what do I think the player characters are going to do in the village? Where are they going to go? Who are they going to want to talk to? And I focus on coming up with that stuff first. And then as I have time, I fill in any gaps that are left. So flesh out the village locations, flesh out village NPCs. I also need to make a random encounter table or tables for the surrounding area, the Misty Forest, or the Misty Wood. I changed that name. I have the old name in here. The Misty Wood, as well as the Fairy Forest, which is the next closest region, and other nearby areas. So again, I'm going to focus on the Misty Wood first because it's the area that's right there. And then next I'll focus on the Fairy Forest because it's the next closest, and so on and so on. I also need a rough map of the campaign area for myself, so I have an idea of what is where. And I'm not an artist, I'm not a cartographer, so my map isn't going to be pretty to look at, but it's really just a representation to me of what is where, you know, what's north of the village, what's south of the village, what's west of the village, and so on and so forth. And again, this is for me, it's not something the players are going to see. It's just to help me keep everything straight in my head where everything is. Now, this is an exploration campaign, so I'm not going to give the players a map. They're going to have to figure out what's out there on their own. I also need to create any adventure locations I may need near the village that the PCs can explore in the early parts of the campaign. So, you know, my idea here is that this village is going to be a quest hub. So there will be numerous quests that player characters can get from the villagers. But in addition to that, I want there to be some interesting sites nearby that they may hear villagers talk about that may pique their interest and that they may wish to go and explore. And if there are some of these I really want to do and the players aren't biting at it and wanting to go check it out, I can always come up with some kind of quest to send them there. But in the beginning, I may just, you know, have them hear about things and see what they want to do. Because again, you know, it's actually really easy to direct players where you want them to go. And, you know, this is why I feel like this idea of railroading players is really just a problem of a GM not having finesse, or it's how they're doing things. There's really, I don't think, any need for players to ever feel railroaded. There are so many ways that you can motivate the players to do what you want them to do, to go where you want them to go based on character motivation. That there's no reason to ever have to railroad someone. So I can only think that a DM who is railroading or is seen to be railroading is just not being skillful enough in how he or she is nudging the players in the direction he or she would like them to go. So, you know, I want to think about that because, you know, if I give them quests pointing them in all these different places, you know, they're going there because I gave them a quest to go there. Or another way to say it is they're going there because I told them to go there, right? But I'm doing it in a way that makes it seem like they're choosing to do it and it's not railroady, but I'm still pointing them in that direction. And I want to play with having a true sandbox element where they can go off in their own direction. They don't have to follow a quest. So in order to do that, I have to be careful not to give them too many quests so that they feel like they have the time or the opportunity or the option to go do their own thing that has nothing to do with something an NPC told them to do. Like, hey, that fairy forest sounds crazy. Let's go check that out. So in addition to all this kind of preparation that I want to do to have the village ready to go, there's some other things I want to do just because this is my first real campaign in my setting of Primordia. And there are quite a few new homebrewed systems that I want to implement. So clerics, druids, paladins, and ranger PCs have the option to begin as a member of a mystery cult that follows their chosen god. I have a cleric, a druid, and a paladin in the group. and 2 of them follow the goddess Dianara and 1 follows the goddess Elandria. So at the very least, I need to come up with some things for those 2 mystery cults. I need to figure out what are the various ranks and privileges that one receives in those cults, and how are some ways that player characters can move up in the ranks. I'm also still kicking around a way to figure out gifts of magic. So since the very inception of Primordia a couple years ago, I had this idea that the magic of the world is so powerful and so infuses everything that it changes those who wield it, just like mutations from radiation kind of thing. And my idea is that as characters advance in level, as they use more magic, whether that's using magic themselves, casting spells, or drinking potions, or using magic items, or just being around magical beings and in magical places, that as they progress, they will earn these gifts of magic, which represent the energy of magic slowly changing them as they use it. And part of this is I want my adventurers to be noticeable physically, just like in the Witcher games, how you can tell someone's a Witcher by looking at them, because the transformation that they go through makes certain changes, like their eyes look like cat eyes and things like that. So I want the same kind of thing in Primordia, where you can tell someone who's used magic because they look physically different than a normal person. But I also don't want it to be the same for everybody. And the idea behind this is that these gifts of magic will usually have some kind of physical manifestation, so that you look different, and that the touch of magic is obviously on you, but would also have some kind of mechanical benefit as well. So that's something I would still like to figure out. This is the one system that I've kind of been going around in circles on, and have yet to make significant progress on it and come up with things I really like. I also want to design a unique magic item for each character. This will be what I classify as a relic item, which is a special type of magic item that its power, the power of the item, is in part determined by the power of the person wielding it. So, for instance, a magical sword who is more powerful in the hands of a powerful fighter than it would be in the hands of a not powerful or a low-level fighter. A way to say this from a game perspective is that basically the items level up as the characters level up. So in this way, the item scales with the character so that I can give them a cool item at first level, and they'll still be using that item at 20th level. So I need to come up with one of those for each player character. I need to decide what is the item, what can it do right now, and what is it going to be able to do in the future? What are the ways that it's going to be able to grow? Now, this is something I don't need to figure this all out right now. Really, all I need right now is I need to know what the thing does right now for each of these items. Now, I'm going to come up with ideas of where I think the item's going to go and what I think it ultimately will be able to do. But I don't need to carve those ideas in stone, because I don't need them yet. I don't need those until I need them. And it may be that as we play and as I get to know the characters better, and as maybe the characters change and evolve through the campaign, I may have better ideas of ways for these items to change. So, you know, the more ideas I come up with now, the more likely I am to get married to them and not want to change them, even if there's a better idea. So I think it's actually good to leave as many blanks there as possible that I can fill in later as that time approaches and I know more about this character and what this item might look like for them. I'm also creating a player's guide for the campaign. And this is a document I'm going to provide to the players to spell out the various homebrew systems and rules I'm going to use, the various character options that are different than what's in the PHB, provide character creation guidelines, give information on the setting and the gods and all that kind of good stuff. I also want to come up with some new backgrounds for the campaign. I think a great way to personalize your D&D game to the particular setting that you're using, especially if it's a homebrew setting, is to come up with some backgrounds particular to that setting. I also want to come up with a few new cleric domains to flesh out the domains available for the gods of Primordia. I also need to flesh out the gods themselves so that I can have descriptions of the gods for the players. I need to decide what character options I'm going to allow from the Player's Handbook, the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, Unearthed Arcana, and now Xanathar's Guide, etc. I need to come up with the various ranks for the Guild of Adventurers and what perks the PCs will get at each rank. And I have another homebrew system that ties into the high-level story I've mentioned that I need to work on as well. But for spoiler reasons, I'm not going to talk in detail about that today. And then I also need to come up with any maps or handouts that I'll need for the first few sessions. So this is kind of my laundry list of things to work on. Now, this isn't all stuff that I need to have done before the second session. Again, I'm all about creating what I need as I need it. So, you know, a lot of this stuff I can kind of work on in the background and just have it ready when I need it. For instance, the guild ranks and perks. I'm not really going to need that until the player characters go back to Elandria and are inducted into the guild. And even then I won't need it yet because, you know, they'll be at the lowest rank at that point. So yeah, you know, just focusing on what I need as I need it. All right, so that's what I did as far as preparing for the second session. And we've already run the second session, so you can see the actual play of that to see as far as how everything went. And I'll be back here in a later installment talking about how session 2 went and kind of giving my thoughts about it. All right. DM Dave asks, are you planning to post a player's guide or excerpts at some point? Yes, that's a great question. So actually, I've already posted some things from the player's guide in the patron stream. So if you're a patron of Star Walker Studios at the tier 1 $5 level, you get access to that. And I've been doing it basically a chapter at a time. And I'm going to continue doing that until all of the, at least the new mechanical stuff will be in there. I'm not so much posting like all the descriptive stuff, but the new domains and backgrounds I came up with, new spells, new magic items, things like that. I'm going to be posting for patrons. And then I am kicking around the idea of maybe someday publishing this player's guide. It keeps growing. I keep adding to it as we do the campaign. It's up around 60 pages right now. So if it gets to the point that I feel like it's meaty enough, and my wife and I have the time to lay it out and everything, I'd like to put it up for sale on the website someday. So that could be a possibility as well. But for right now, patrons can check it out in kind of chapter by chapter. So for future episodes in this series, next I'll do an episode where I discuss creating the Mistywood encounter table. And after that will be the episode where I discuss how session 2 went. And then the next episode about that, we'll talk about session 3. And I think we're going to get caught up here pretty soon and be caught up with the campaign. We just played session 4 yesterday, and next Tuesday, which is November 14th, we will be playing our 5th session. And we play pretty much every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, and I live stream it right here. So I hope you'll come check it out. And feel free, if you're watching an actual play and you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave those in the comments for that video, even if it's one I've already talked about in behind the scenes. Every time I do one of these, I check the comments to see if there's anything people have asked that I want to talk about. So, you know, I've had quite a bit to talk about here in the beginning, just kind of how I set everything up and got everything going. But more and more as we go on in this series and as we go on in the campaign, I'm going to rely on you to let me know what you want me to talk about and what you want to hear about as far as the behind the screen of this campaign. So thank you very much for watching or listening, however you're getting this, and hope I see you next Tuesday. And let me know if you have any questions or thoughts, and I'll try to address those in future live streams. Thanks again.